I'm 10 years old. It's the middle of the night, and I'm jarred awake when I hear his ankles cracking in the hallway outside my room. Please, God, not again. I tuck my blankets tighter around me, determined not to make it easy for him this time. When it's done, as usual, my older brother says, "Don't tell anyone." It's amazing the impact of 3 little words. Rudyard Kipling said, "Words are the most powerful drug used by mankind." The words, "Don't tell anyone," kept me from speaking up, even in social situations. What would happen if I said something I shouldn't? That fear kept me from initiating conversation. And conversations are key when the right questions are asked. I was about 14 years old when my mother came into my room and sat on the edge of my bed one night, as if we were going to have a heart-to-heart talk. "Jackie, are you letting someone do something to you they shouldn't be?" Are you letting? 3 little words that made it clear to me the abuse was all my fault. I was letting it happen. George Bernard Shaw cautioned us once. The biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. To further illustrate the ways I was silenced, my mother was reading the newspaper one morning when she was shocked by a headline. A friend of hers had been arrested for molesting his children. I was bracing for the question she was going to ask me about the abuse he'd perpetrated on me, the abuse I'd also kept silent. I was thinking this was finally going to be my chance to say something, when my mother said, "Jackie, I'm so glad he never did that to you." How could I disrupt my mother's happy ignorance? I didn't say anything while screaming in my head, "He had done that to me." When I was a grown woman with 2 little children, 3 little words shook my world and shattered the safety of my silence. "It's a girl." My brother and his wife now had a daughter. I was the only one who knew the danger she was in. What should I do? What would you do? If I spoke up to protect my niece, I would bring shame on my entire family. Maybe my husband would leave me. What if they thought I was crazy and took my kids? For months, I lived in this silo of suicidal thoughts, knowing if I took my life and my secret to the grave, there would be no one to protect my children. I started to tell. Most people believed me, although my mother wouldn't speak to me. Upon disclosing to 3 different family members, including my own father, they all said, "Your mom's not going to believe you." When I began therapy, I was asked, "Jackie, do you think you can forgive?" Was she serious? She may as well have been asking me to pick up a garbage truck and throw it across the road. I mean, that's how impossible forgiveness seemed in that moment. If you aren't working toward the possibility, you'll never fully heal. Several months into therapy, I was encouraged to write a letter to my brother. I could tear it up, I could burn it, I could mail it to him, or I could read it to him in person. I chose the latter. It was time for me to spill my emotional garbage at his feet. That letter read in part, "You killed me. You murdered my soul while taking from me without permission what was most precious. You used me for pleasure, left me poisoned, slowly dying, unable to dream and feeling forever unsafe. Now you have a daughter. Will you take from her what you took from me? If I hear you have, I will take her from you any way I can." My brother didn't deny my long list of accusations. And I learned that he sought help as a teenager. 3 different authority figures knew of his abuse. No one helped either one of us. They didn't even tell our parents. Can you see how poor communication can allow abuse to flourish and to cultivate silence? My little family and I moved away. And for more than a decade, I worked on finding myself. And I learned the power of my words and my voice. I had planted years before for my brother a little seed of compassion. And in fact, he'd promised me, upon reading him that letter, that he would never hurt his daughter. And so 10 years later, I began to see that that seed I'd planted was now flourishing, a harvest of forgiveness. I even felt that garbage truck I'd been asked to throw was now a Hot Wheels size. I had found a way to forgive. And my brother needed to know. I flew back home to face my brother for the first time in years and say 3 marvelous, miraculous words. I forgive you. There have been volumes of books, articles, and sermons written about those 3 little words, and yet we don't fully perceive their power. My brother sobbed for finally being given permission to have a different life. He'd been in and out of marriages, jobs, and jail. He needed a different life. I was the only one who could give him that. Without my forgiveness, he'd been shackled. Now we were both free. He changed his life. What about my niece, his daughter? Thank you for asking. 20 years post-forgiveness. In a moment of weakness, my brother made a horrible mistake. My niece was then 30 years old when her dad was arrested for a crime against a child she knew. Confused and conflicted, she called me. "Aunt Jackie, how could my dad do that?" Her question indicated to me that my brother had kept his promise to never hurt her. I told her my story. And although I was so sad because I knew another victim existed, I was elated by 3 little words she said. "Aunt Jackie, you saved me." It's rare in life to know the impact our words and actions can have on others. The things we do and say are just so easily forgotten. The sacrifice I made to break my silence was worth it. My words had mattered for one child. When my brother was sentenced to prison, he was required to make a list of all his victims. I was on that list, even though I'd never filed a criminal complaint, and despite the fact that all of the abuse took place during the years when we were both minors. Sadly, the court ordered he can have no contact with me. Our siblings can't even talk to him about me. Now on parole, if my brother breaks the order of the court, he goes back to prison. In one magical moment, 3 words, I forgive you, freed us both. And now a law has taken away our freedom to have a relationship of any kind. My brother can never hear this story, but my niece has. She remarked, "Thank you for breaking your silence for me and my safety. Your story can help the silence feel seen and maybe even brave enough to end that silence." Oh, I hope she's right. Silence is often more traumatic than the violence that precipitates it. In fairy tales, they never talk about forgiveness when the handsome hero swoops in to save the imprisoned maiden. The ogre is usually just destroyed, and well, that's the end of it. I have found, though, that even when trauma happens more than once upon a time, with forgiveness, we can live happily even after. So, break your silence. Thank you.